Cool. From my side, you guys know me. Just some UI stuff. So basically building this custom checkbox. The custom check, it shouldn't take too long, but yeah, just building this custom checkbox. Finishing off the filter. Basically completed the individual page. I don't know how you guys feel, but I felt that we should keep the accordions, just change up the layout here. I can see that it's a bit squished here, so I might just space this out a bit more, but just leave the accordions. I don't know how you guys feel because the original design has them without accordions. It might take up a bit more room and help, I guess, design layout in that way. Like I said, the original design came without accordions. Don't mind the icons. Oh crap, sorry. Don't mind the icons. It's just placeholders. These are just all placeholders. Don't mind those. Don't mind those. So they're placeholders for what actually needs to go there. So yeah. And then with the go back, I kind of used a thingy rather, breadcrumb rather. I didn't feel like the go back was like, it didn't look aesthetically pleasing after I coded it. I was like, nah, that doesn't look nice. And then I just coded like a breadcrumb, which looked a lot better in my opinion. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, breadcrumb is this thing. So basically, where it routes you from where you come from to where you are.
So I have a suggestion. I like the breadcrumb, and I don't think you have to change it. Instead of having a back button, you could literally just have an arrow, like a minimalistic arrow.
Yeah, facts. I was thinking of doing something with this over here. I was thinking of doing something like because now we're no longer on the home page, right? And this obviously redirects you home. So when you're on that page for that collection, it could be like I don't know, it could change into like a home or like a back button. I was thinking of playing with something there.
Oh yeah, that would be great. That would actually look really, really cool.
Because also like somewhere here, it just feels like out of place unless I put it like maybe on the left here or something, like next to this. So just have just have the arrow. Just change the color.
And maybe make it like just a gray arrow, like the same color as the Hashbits. It could just be like a gray arrow, just like that.
Going backwards. Yeah.
Or you could put it, if not there, you can put it next to the home.
Right.
And either go home. They can either click on the home to go to the home page or click on the arrow just to go back.
Right. Agreed. I see. I'll do that. I'll implement that. Cool. Yeah, but those are the main changes that I've made since our last discussion. Yeah, I also implemented the footer design. This is actually a bit more tedious. I'm mentioning it because this is a bit more tedious than I thought it would be. But anyway, not important. Cool. The necessity for this navbar, I think we need to remove like as soon as possible. And then for a phased approach of our deployment, I believe in terms of mock design, we're far enough. I just need to make sure, I figured it out. I figured why my images are not fitting right. So I can put this back. In our next meeting, this will all be done anyway. So I figured it out. It was my layout. It was my layout fill. It might be done even tomorrow. It was my layout fill, man. It was annoying me. So I figured it out because this thing was tiny. I don't know if you guys remember from the last meeting, but this image was really tiny and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't scaling. But anyway, all that's missing now is the filter, which I am in the midst of building. Everything's responsive. I don't need to explain that to you guys. I'm sure you guys have been looking and seeing this whole time. But anyway, the last thing I need to build now is the filter, which is currently what I'm going through. Which is this. You guys remember this, right? And then the navigation, which has 2 seconds, and then the modals, the forms for each of the processes. So mock UI, from a mock UI side, by Friday, we can guarantee completion. And then after that, we need to start integrating and posting on the mainnet. And actually, we can start integrating with the testnet and testing everything. But then the exciting part comes where we then move to the mainnet. Once we get the testnet application up, can host this thing on Versal. Which reminds me, actually, one of my next steps is to host this on Versal, and then I'll share the URL in the group, and then all of you guys just open it from as many devices as you can, and then tell me about the user experience that you're having. Like any issues that you're having. That's like part of user acceptance. So we need to vet it ourselves first before we hand it over to the public to say, here you guys go, here's a site that you guys can use. So just first, we'll do an aesthetic UAT. I call it UAT, but it's essentially internal, so we can give it another name. Yeah, just so that we can vet it aesthetically. Then we'll have a second phase of UAT probably next week, Friday, or the week after that, which is go live week. But we'll have a second round of testing where we test it on the test net, and then we'll move to the main net.
Alrighty then.
From my side.
Cool. So from my side, I'll share my screen shortly. But before I do, you know how it goes. I always start these off with a young question for you. So cool.
We're in trouble.
Oh yeah,
so
I'm already like, oh shit. Shit.
Okay, cool. So if you guys remember like the last presentations I've made, I spoke a lot about how we need to build an economy and the hallmarks of a great economy. If you guys remember, one of the end goals of the project was for us to maybe create a DAO at some point in time through our project. Does anybody know what a DAO is?
A DAO?
100%.
Did you say a DAO?
Yeah.
Yes, DAO.
I do not know what a DAO is, eh? Hi, Key.
Very cool. So, Masoro, you can answer and tell Kat what a DAO is.
All right. So, Kat, a DAO is a decentralized, well, the word DAO stands for decentralized autonomous organization. Right. And you can think of it really as this new form of business model, right? Or operational model.
Right.
As well as, I guess you can equate business model with ownership model. It's basically a new way of doing business where kind of the business is, in a sense, supposed to be run by rules, right? But unlike a centralized organization, in a centralized organization, few people create those rules and control those rules, right? But in a decentralized autonomous organization, it would make sense to me that it's more of a, the power is not centralized to anyone. So somehow voting power is acquired in the organization through some means, usually a token. And so if anyone, the idea is that anyone who owns this token or the delineation of ownership in this organization has a controlling vote. And the idea is to remove humans from key decision-making in an organization. There's no one definition of a decentralized autonomous organization. Although we use this word a DAO, I think the various different purposes, right, or the variety of purposes that a DAO can be used for really makes a DAO a different thing in different contexts, right? For example, you can set up a decentralized autonomous organization to buy assets, right? Which kind of, that works like a venture capital firm, except there's no person who, who's like this, who runs it, who owns it. Through buying the token of the DAO, maybe there's a voting process that decides which property the DAO would go in to buy. Through communication and collaboration of the what do you call it? The various owners, then, you know, the DAO then gets to make those decisions. So I think if I were to redefine what a decentralized autonomous organization is, I think it's just a different way of making decisions, right? If we were going to make it fundamental, and it's a
different way of making decisions inside a business.
Yes, inside of a business, 100%.
Okay.
It's a democratized way. It has its critiques. I'm not sure how the rules are exactly instilled for the DAO to be able to run successfully, but the idea, I think the radical idea of what a DAO is that it gives ownership to the people participating in the organization. Whereas traditional organizations exploit the people working for the organization. So they contribute their time and labor, but the owners benefit disproportionately. And in a DAO, the idea is that we all kind of equally, to an extent, you know, to an extent, we all kind of equally have a stake in the business and have a controlling decision in terms of what the business does next.
So because of that, this will be the last time I ever asked Masoro to answer, because he just basically blew over my whole presentation.
I was about to say,
there was some point I wanted to cut him off and just be like, okay, it's enough now.
Okay, please, my turn.
Shut up now, like, geez. But no, that was a brilliant answer, man. Like, I think you captured it very, very well in terms of what it is and what like its purposes are. So a lot of my presentation is really just going to be trying to can you just enable sharing, Kathy?
Sorry.
Yeah, but while you're doing that, a lot of my presentation is going to be centered around contextualizing DAOs in the, around NFTs. And then I think part of what I'm going to need to be doing over the next, because this is going to fall in heavily, I think, with our roadmap. Whether or not this will be phase 1 or phase 2 of our roadmap. Okay, you may be the host, but that works too.
I'm sorry, I couldn't find it, and I just felt like that would be quicker.
The easiest way.
Yeah, so I think whether or not it'll be phase 1 or phase 2 of our roadmap is something we need to discuss later on. But it is something that I think is going to become a pivotal part of our roadmap just by virtue of the kinds of things that we are going to be able to do. And also just when I look at the inception of our project, if we look at it, this would not be what it is if it wasn't for the fact that we had diverse minds that were responsible for the creation of this. And so I see a lot of value in us eventually being able to open this up to community organization, simply because I feel like we've said, you know, there's no experts in the field. We're all literally babies in terms of our understanding, and you never know who we might end up finding and bringing onto the team by virtue of the creation of this DAO that might end up changing the direction of our project entirely for the better. So that being said, you know, ultimately the end goal of most NFTs, if not all of them, is to become a decentralized autonomous organization. So let's explore what that means and why. So Marcel's basically defined it quite well. It's a community-led entity with no central authority. That's like the baseline definition. It's fully autonomous and transparent. If we're putting this in the context of cryptocurrency, it means that smart contracts are going to lay the foundational rules. Like Marcel said, there are agreed upon rules that govern this. They execute the agreed upon decisions agreed upon by the members of the community that contribute to that DAO. And at any point, the proposals, voting, and even the very code of itself can be publicly audited by every member that participates in that community. So to put a visual representation of what this looks like, typical businesses look like the centralized network, where here you have the main person or the main governance structure of that organization, and they basically control everything that happens. If we're talking about this in the context of a network, all of those the respective nodes are going to feed into this bigger network. A good example of this would be a bank. Then we have our decentralized network in this case, which is what would represent the DAO. Just forgive the fact that they have these few points that seem like they're bigger than others. I think it's just for illustrative purposes. They're all equal in terms of their contribution. But the idea is that all of these different nodes in the network are all individual entities that equally control the server, and not the server, the network. And none of these different entities have more power than another. Distributed network, rather similar, but these work all independently and then connect with each other in order to, for different reasons, but I don't think it's too important for the context of this presentation. It's just there for completeness sake. So cool. When we contextualize this to the NFT space, if we're looking at this in the context of NFTs, our NFTs, every person who owns a Hashbit technically then has ownership that allows them to then participate in the governance of that particular economy. So owning a Hashbit means you've now become somebody who's part of it, technically owning part of that network. So let's assume that we have 100 Hashbit tokens. That means that we've divided it up into 100 votes, and the more people own, the more votes they can get. And then this speaks to Marcelo's points, because if you notice, he said people can somewhat benefit equally. And I think this is where the important distinctions become. Your ability to benefit as well as your ability to participate in that network is directly proportionate to how much of that network you own, as well as how much you are contributing to that network by virtue of the tasks that you're completing within that particular organization. Those tasks can then be defined by us as the people who are creating the organization. And that's how we can then look at the dimension of that DAO. What's up?
I'm so lost. I'm like, yo.
Ask me questions. Ask me questions before I move on. Ask me questions.
This is a lot. So each token within this network represents, I think we had this discussion once, represents a share. Is it like the new unit of ownership in the company?
Yeah.
And then therefore, and then we value that based on what you're doing in the company, right?
No, look at it. I think can I take this on?
Go for it.
So Katli, think about it just in a programming sense, right? You get to, the idea of decentralized autonomous organizations is that instead of people running businesses, rules do, right? So not the human, but the code. And these rules can be represented as code. So there are infinite ways in which, just like there are infinite apps you can create,
Yeah.
there's no set path for what you can create for these rules, right?
Okay.
So part of the rules of your organizations, remember, you need to write a code that can run a company absence of a leader. That's the problem that you're solving, right? The company needs to have operations, meaning the company has to have a process where it decides what's the next project that we take on, or should we do this? You know, the company needs to make decisions, and you need to write what are going to be the algorithms that are going to facilitate those decisions. And you need to provide incentives for the people participating in the making of those decisions. There needs to be an incentive for me to play my part in governing this company. I need to have an incentive. One of the incentives that I have is the ownership of an NFT that becomes more valuable as the network becomes more valuable, as the projects that networks are undertaking become more valuable. So I have my piece of ownership, which is the NFT. What also can be an incentive for me, I need to also participate. So somehow in the code, you can provide incentives, maybe a point system. Just think about it like from zero. Think about like this thing doesn't exist. Think about maybe, okay, not only do we need people to be incentivized through ownership. For example, I own shares of Purple Group, but I'm not contributing to Purple Group's decision-making or anything, right? I'm just owning and benefiting from them growing, but there need to be people who are incentivized to grow the company, Purple Group. These are people that come to annual shareholder meetings, that vote for certain motions, right? So we're recreating that in code. We're automating that. So maybe there's extra. Think about how preference shares work, right? Maybe if you can superimpose that into tasks that need to be completed, there's a certain point system that applies to people who complete tasks. Let's say I participated in today's vote. So maybe, perhaps my rank is now higher as a contributor for Hashbits, right? Maybe there's a ranking system of some sorts. So just think about it like that. Think about it as problem solving. How to basically, and the problem that you're solving is how to run a business without humans necessarily deciding, or one human deciding the direction and the decisions the company takes. Does it make sense?
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you've laid a really good foundation for what's going to come next, because I think the rest of my presentation is going to use like practical examples to kind of break down what Mr. said. So let's go through that 100 tokens thing, right? So now let's assume that each token, like each NFT, when I say token in this case, it means NFT, each NFT costs 10 H bar, right? So now we sold each and every one of those. Now we have 1,000 H bar within our like treasury, or let's say the treasury of Hashbits, right? Cool. We can then do one of two things with that, right? One, we have the option to then take that money and then upon the Hedera network, create another token. This token becomes the utility token that is going to be used to reward members of the community for participating in the growth of Hashbits, right? So good example here is this other project called CryptoKongs. They're CyberKongs. They're an NFT project, right? They've created their own token, or utility token rather, called Banana Token. The Banana Token is basically what they then use to incentivize different activity within their network, right? So the Banana Token in itself doesn't have any inherent like economic value, but it's got utility value. I'm going to explain what that means in a particular case, right? So these tokens that people are holding, right? Let's assume that from the H bar that we have now, we're going to decide to create 100 hash tokens. These hash tokens are the tokens that are going to be used to incentivize people within the Hashbits project. So we're calling them hash tokens, right? Create 1 million of these hash tokens from that 1,000 H bar that we had. So that means the value of each of these is going to be worth 0.001 H bar. For those of us who struggle with maths, Marcelo, don't worry, I did a little calculation over there. The H didn't help, eh? Like you really looked like you need help. But anyway.
No, I did.
So these tokens can then be held and then used for their utility. So for example, let's assume you have your, I need to figure out how can I make this more practical. So this highlighted your hash bit. These are your hash tokens that you're going to be incentivized with to do certain things in the project, right? Assuming you capture, or you get, let's say, Yeah, so this is your hash bit. This is how your hash bit comes. Let's say you've done certain things for us, like, I don't know, help design the white paper, whatever the case may be. We don't know, but hypothetically speaking, you've done a few things. Now we've rewarded you by giving you these 2 hash tokens, right? You can then use these hash tokens to upgrade your NFT, being your hash bit. And now let's say the hash bit gets a cap on it, right? So now this increases the value of your hash bit. So this is the ways that we can use to incentivize the person who owns that particular hash bit to contribute to the network. So you're not economically incentivizing them by giving them these tokens because they can't trade them for money, but they can use them for the other utilities that we've granted them. So for example, one of those utilities could be if you own 500 hash tokens, you can then upgrade your hash bit in a particular type of way, thus driving up the price of it. If you have 1,000 of them, you can then maybe be added to a particular community of people that has specific access to different types of things. So that's the way that we can then use those hash tokens to drive to incentivize people to participate in the creation of our hash bit project. Does that make sense? So there are different ways you can go about incentivizing them. So it's important. It's very, very important to note that these things don't necessarily have their own economic value. Just give me 1 second. I should have my brain on charger. Yeah. So don't have.
But you get that, Daddy.
Yeah, it's making sense.
Okay, cool. So it's very important to note that they don't have any particular like economic benefit. And this is very, very important because if we don't make this distinction, this is where we then have the problems that a lot of other tokens face, where they are now being deemed as securities because of what they're falling, because of the pitfalls they didn't avoid. I'm going to go a little bit more into securities further on in the presentation, just so that makes sense. But just bear in mind, making sure that the actual token, the utility token that we create, doesn't have any like economic value, but has utility value is very, very important. And we get to define what that utility is, depending on how many people own. And these are the ways that we can use to incentivize people without having to use money to incentivize them, or directly incentivize them rather. If we're talking about this in the context of the H bar, so because people might also decide to buy hash tokens in order to upgrade or do whatever they want to do, this in turn is going to then also contribute to the overall H bar pool, simply because we've built this on the H bar network. What does this do for H bar? It also assists with the liquidity. So there are other ways that we're going to be aiding the much bigger network that we're going to be building upon, which is good because we've already got in contact with these people. So there are maybe ways they'll be able to help guide us in this particular direction in terms of how we can leverage off of the ideas of liquidity and what other utilities we can potentially provide that then possibly help us as well as help their project, right? But that's just a side note, something that I wanted us to think about, right? So the beauty of this is the value of the utility token can be influenced by many, many things. So this can be influenced by the NFT sales, the royalties from sales, or even any other business decision that brings attention to the overall NFT project itself. So this includes the overall growth of Abby and our respective like Strictly projects. If those start to do well because of their association with the Hashbits project, we can then drive up the hash tokens price. If we're doing this, we're then driving up the overall value of the entire project, as well as driving up the overall value of the underlying network being Hedera up as well. Because we're bringing in more money into that particular thing. So now the risk here is what I was speaking about with the whole security thing. The risk here is that there's a very thin line that one can cross to becoming deemed as a security, depending on how we decide to distribute these tokens. So a very important thing is we must never promise people like financial gains for holding a particular NFT, because that's when you start to cross that line. Further, if the utility of the tokens that we're creating becomes null by virtue of lack of demand, then we can see a massive drop in these tokens. So remember, something I've emphasized a lot in our previous talks is the fact that we are building an economy. The hallmark of a successful economy is that it never stops. What that requires is that it needs constant utility and productivity in it. So the ways that we create utility for these particular tokens is going to be very important. People need to want to continue building the project with us, because if they don't, then the economy stops. And if the economy stops, the overall price of whatever utility token and the native project that it's built on being Hashbits and the bigger overarching project being Hedera gets affected by that. So it's also important to understand that what we're building, in the long term, while it might only be like a fraction of what it contributes to the overall Hedera network, Well, now, if we do this right, we might actually have some sort of influence over the direction of its overall market, because people are going to be buying in HBAR, which means that more money is going to be going into this particular project, into that particular cryptocurrency. So it's very important for us to be very cognizant of those lines that we're going to be moving into, right? So then just to
If I
quickly
may,
explain, sorry, yeah.
not to cut you off, Miles, but if I may add just a little bit on the fact that this is why I think Abby as a platform is so crucial to this economy, right? You said the hallmark of a successful economy is that it doesn't stop, and it needs to keep growing, and transactions needs to keep happening, activity needs to keep happening in the economy for it to be a successful economy, right? With sustained growth, with a sustained growth projection for the economy, and I think providing a platform for education is such a big incentive for growth in the economy, right? How many educators can we onboard who can use this platform in order to to distribute their content, right? And how many people can we attract by virtue of the new incentives that crypto provides, right, for people to participate in old ideas, right? So, I mean, just think about all the things that are possible. As a learner, the transaction is one way, right? They call this unilateral value flows. When you are a student at a university, you go, you pay the university, you get the education, and you leave with a certificate, right? And that's kind of a unilateral value flow in a sense that the value accrued for the university. I guess the value you get is not financial value, but educational value. But in a decentralized autonomous organization, an educational platform where not only the contributors to the educational material, but also the people participating on the platform as well can have some sort of ownership. I think crypto has introduced those new incentives to participate in new industries in that way, right? A good example that always comes up in this industry is, imagine, for example, an Uber that's not owned by the app, but owned by the drivers, right? That changes the dynamic of society. So I think in the education.
Sorry,
Yes,
imagine a university that's not owned by the people, but is not owned by like executives, but owned by students.
but it's owned by the exactly. That's what I'm trying to move to, is an educational platform that's owned by the people learning and benefiting from the platform. That changes the conversation of society. That changes capitalism as a theory of incentives for progress and economic growth, right? We haven't always lived in the same economic systems. So this is a deep conversation about organizing societies, right? We didn't always have capitalism, but capitalism arose as a need for incentive during a specific time. And now we live in a time where information and value is moving differently. And we have a more evolved workforce, right? That doesn't just care about getting that payment, going home and taking care of their family, but they care about ownership and that want to contribute in society in certain different ways. I think the internet has democratized information, and I think that is the catalyst for people wanting to contribute to societies in different ways, just because so many more of them have access to this, what was once specialized knowledge. So I think Abby should be at least one of, right? I think projects like Katlego Strictly Dev, and also what's happening with the Strictly group. Well, Strictly is part of kind of the long-term vision of Abby, in a sense, it is where the educational products are developed for the Abby platform. That's our contribution to the Abby platform, as well as having to get in. For example, Wits has online courses, and they're building a successful ecosystem with that. If we can get contributions from them to distribute on the Abby platform, the same kind of business model Coursera took in approaching universities and asking to distribute their educational material, whatever the economy entails in terms of how it propagates with educational value, I think that is the incentive, right, to keep the economy going. And if we just have to figure out a way for that, so that these transactions are heavily reliant on either HBAR, but also Hashbits as an NFT projects, and subsequently when we create our governance token. So I just wanted to add that to your presentation about making sure that we're building a successful economy based on what you just communicated.
No, fully. I think you made a very valuable contribution there. Because it does speak to the overall like bigger arching theme of the projects that we're trying to build. Like, when we speak about we want to change the world, that's what it looks like. It looks like students going into university and knowing that they're not just subjects they're not just subjects paying for it, they own it. You know what I mean? Meaning that they're also incentivized to perform more because the performance of that university also dictates the ownership. You know what I mean? Dictates the value of their ownership. That's a completely different chat. Imagine studying knowing that like the way you study influences how much you earn. You know, it's a complete bro. You'll never see me sleep, dog. So it's a completely different conversation, and that's the kind of space that we're moving into right now. So just to wrap up, I spoke a bit about securities, and it's not necessarily that securities are a bad thing. It just depends on the direction we want to take it, and how much regulation we want, and whether or not we want to leverage off regulation or we want to avoid regulation, depending on what we want to do with our project, right? So 4 different things that we look at when we want to define is something a security. Is there an investment of money? Number 1. Is there an investment into a common enterprise? Is there an expectation for profit for the investors? And is the expectation of profit based off of the work of others? So I would say that technically we're going to end up filling up the first 2 by virtue of you have to buy an NFT for you to be part of it. So that's the first one. Is the investment into a common enterprise? It'll be the Hashbits project. So that's number 2. The last 2, I would say, are actually the most important things that the SEC tends to look at. I know that we're not in America, but I mean, if this thing blows up and Adara says, yo, guys, fly over to LA. Love that. But anyway, if that ever happens, you know, these are the kinds of things we need to be prepared for. And I think the last 2 things are the biggest things that they tend to look at. Is there an expectation of profit for the investors? Which is why I emphasize we cannot monetarily incentivize people with owning these Hashbits. The utility, the value they get from maybe getting hash tokens needs to be strictly utility based. It needs to be, it's going to further their education. It's going to up the value of their NFT. Their NFT, not necessarily a direct valuation of their bank account. And it's only upping the valuation of their NFT by them completing certain tasks, which speaks to the 4th point, which is there an expectation of profit based off of the work of others? Their profit is going to be dependent solely on how much they work, not us. You know what I mean? So they're not sitting there waiting for the developers to come and do something new or anything like that. We've put it out there that if you want to be able to benefit off of these things, you need to work for it. You know, that completely, that changes the conversation about whether or not it's security. And the security is basically just like a normal like an asset class, like a normal asset class that you, like Masoro gave him the example of you owning Purple Group shares. That would be a good example of a security in that it's literally ticks all of those boxes. And importantly, the expectation of profit for us is based solely on what the owners of Purple Group do. We have no contribution to that. We have no idea the direction they're going to take it. It's all speculative from our point. In the case of a DAO, which is what we're trying to create, ultimately the direction and growth of it, while it's going to be heavily influenced by what we do and the confines of the project we make, it's going to be heavily influenced, or just as heavily influenced rather, by the people contributing to that project and their ownership thereof. So this is why I was saying, this then leads to me saying that security tokens are not necessarily a bad thing, simply because they are more regulated, which can be of some advantage, especially if we're going to be speaking about education. There are going to be certain things that we might want to have regulated just so that it's easier for us in terms of the way that we present this to people and the lines aren't blurred. Good example of like just where securities are not necessarily a bad thing is Masoro spoke about being able to buy like property. So it's good for places where you have group ownership of things that were particularly difficult to own as a group by virtue of the thing it was. So a house, you could never like have divided that into equal units and say you're getting a third of the bedroom and you're getting that's your ownership.
Some black families that might argue with you there.
Fair enough. But in the context of this, it changes completely because now if you own the utility tokens, the amount of utility tokens you own can correlate directly to the proportion of the entire house as an asset you own. And that's a different conversation. So we're speaking in the context of universities, it could look like that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, if that's the direction we'd want to take Abby in. So these are things that we need to somewhat define somewhere within our roadmap, which is why I'm bringing it to our attention now. So I spoke about 2 things. I said, we could use the HBAR to create a utility token, being the hash token, and I explained quite a lot about that. Another way that we could incentivize people is we could really just give them the rewards being the unique access to certain things, like, for example, I didn't actually put the example there, but like I said, unique access to a specific, let's say, classroom where you're getting taught by Vusi Temba Choir or something like that. You know what I mean? Access to those kinds of things. We can give them direct access to that. And I don't think that's a problem. I personally, however, think that it's better, it might be better for us to use the token because it's easier for us to regulate exactly and regulate what progress looks like by virtue of us distributing these tokens. And I think it gives them a little bit more autonomy over what they want to do with it, how they want to utilize the utility, in my opinion. It doesn't even have to be in the form of tokens. It could be a point system like Masako spoke about earlier. But this is the conversation that this opens us up to. Concept of fractionalization is just something I learned, so I just wanted to share it because I thought it was pretty cool. The concept of that is basically, you know how these Bored Ape NFTs are just exorbitantly expensive? There's no way, even if we sold everything we own, we still can't get why. So like, the idea behind fractionalization is being able to take an NFT and then give people ownership of small little bits of that. There are different ways that can be done. Either the actual project that owns that NFT could fractionalize certain amounts of their NFTs. So let's say out of the 10,000 we have, we could choose to make 500 of them available to fractional ownership. Or it could be a thing of we as a project buy another bigger NFT and then fractionalize the ownership of that. And we could then use that as distribution. We could then distribute the fractions of those things as also incentive. The nice thing about that is it does two things. Number one, let's assume we owned a Bored Ape, for example, as Hashbits, and we fractionalize the ownership of that amongst the different people in it. It does two things. The first of which is it's a massive incentive because everyone wants to own a Bored Ape, and it's a very good project that is likely still going to grow by virtue of what it is. The second thing it does is we own that Hashbit, and we own that Bored Ape at the end of the day. As a result of that, that's part of the assets that are ultimately boosting up the price of Hashbits because it builds into what we own as the collective group. So if the overall Bored Ape project goes up, we as a project in terms of our net worth also go up. So there's an interesting concept that I saw there that I really, really liked, that I thought would be nice for us to share. We can decide how we want to go about using that if we decide we ever want to use it in the future, but I thought it was a nice concept for me to share. And that ends off my presentation, guys.